Welcome back to Beyond Well Science. I'm Sheila Hamilton, and today I'm so delighted to be on the line with filmmaker Lucy Weiner. I want to just tell you a little bit about her experience. She was one of the people who had the experience as a teenager to have to go to a mental institution and found the experience there in talking with other human beings who have also suffered great psychological loss or grief to be one of the most inspiring and enlightening of her life. To that end, Lucy developed a filmmaking series that has won critical acclaim and captured the attention of the work of the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care. Unlocked seeks to bring the voices of many people with lived experience together. And today, Lucy is going to tell us more about that project. Lucy, I am fascinated, first of all, by your personal experience. Tell me what the circumstances were that ended up with you being in a psychiatric hospital.
Well, they were pretty straightforward. One night in the middle of my junior year, I'd been depressed and very anxious for a very long time. And I went into my mother's room. My father had died years before. And I said, listen, I'm going upstairs to take an overdose of sleeping pills. And I had never threatened to hurt myself before, but that night I did take that step forward. And prior to that, I had certainly declared how badly I felt quite a bit. So my mother sighed. She put down her book. She said, good night, dear. And I went upstairs, and I felt like it was a point of honor. I had to do this now.
Wow.
And I emptied out the medicine cabinet and swallowed a whole bunch of pills. And ultimately, it happened a second time. I tried a second time, and I was committed to the psych ward of the local hospital. And from there, I was transferred to a long-term hospital after 3 months. And long story short, I was in a series of private and public hospitals for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And the hospital that made the biggest impression on me was the state hospital where I ended up after my mother's insurance ran out. And I was transferred to the violent ward of the admissions building at Kings Park State Hospital, first in 1967 and then again in 1969. And I honestly didn't know if I ever was going to emerge from that place.
Incredible.
It was terrifying.
Your documentary, Kings Park, Stories from an American Mental Institution, has been used in so many critical settings, universities, research institutions, because you began to allow people who have had the experience to talk about what it is like to have forced medication, to be locked down, to be isolated. And one of the worries that I had was that people would be too critical of you to have it be from the perspective of people who have had mental illness, that it couldn't be trusted because it was from their perspective. Did you run into that?
It's interesting, not as much as I thought, not as much as you might fear. What happened was that when I set out to make the film, Sheila, I wanted simply to tell my own story. I needed, after 33 years, that's how long it had been from my final discharge, to go back and try to understand what had happened to me. But once I really pursued that story, once I actually, got access to my former building, went up to see my former ward, really went quite a distance, my interest turned from my story to the story of the hospital itself. And that's when the film really began to take off, because I really needed to understand, what was this institution? Why was it there? What was the experience of other people who had been locked away? Not just at the time that I had been, but before and after. And what was it like to work there, either as direct care staff or as a social worker or a nurse, a psychiatrist, a psychologist? And what was it like to have somebody you love be there? And last, and perhaps most importantly, what happened in that community after the public hospital closed, which, by the way, was one of the biggest state hospitals in the country, what happened? How was public mental health care then delivered? And I use that word delivered very deliberately, like, you're delivering bread or milk.
Yeah.
How is it delivered? What grew up to take its place? And the film went from being a very personal movie to a film with a much larger social mission. So to get back to your question, this is not just a film about me and other people who have experienced extreme distress that we refer to as mental illness. This is a film about our history of public mental health care and how we've come to face the challenges we face today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lucy, let me ask you, in Oregon, where I live, and we also had quite a large state hospital population that was promised community care, and of course the federal dollars for that never showed up, and so those people are now on our streets, and our mental health crisis is unfolding in front of people's homes and apartments and under bridges and officeways. Did the same thing happen in your state, or did different states handle the emptying of state hospitals in a different way?
I think that story, well, first of all, let me say something first, which is that these hospitals were so much alike that even though they covered the country, when you tell the story of one of these state hospitals, you pretty much are telling the story of all of them. Of course, there are differences. What happened with de-institutionalization, which is what you're talking about, when the hospitals started to be closed, and many of them were closed, some are still open, but much fewer, and they're much smaller. When you tell those stories, you're more or less telling the story of what happened with all the hospitals, how they were run, how they were closed, what happened. And therefore, since the state hospital was the mainstay of our public mental health care system, when you tell the story of one state hospital, you're telling the story of our public mental health care system.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important. I had no idea of this when I set out to try and face my own specific past. No idea. Some states are handling this perhaps better than others. However, I think another thing that's happening is that because there are so many problems and because we never fulfilled the promises of community mental health care and because we seem to remain unwilling to support responsible care that really can lead people to the very best they can do and the very best they're capable of.
Yeah.
Because we've been unwilling to do that, we're facing the kind of crisis you're describing. And I do not think the solution is to recreate the asylum, which is no kind of asylum. And I really understand, and you're probably aware, that a lot of people are beginning to think, well, maybe we just need to go back to the way things were.
Well, Lucy, I've been dying to have this conversation with someone because I have a personal point of view, which is it's not compassionate or progressive to let people freeze to death on our streets either.
Right.
And
absolutely.
And they are so in desperate need of this kind of shelter, even if they don't understand how much at risk they are to the elements. And so what do we do for people that are so sick that they're not even aware of how advanced ill they've become? What's the solution if not that kind of forced care? Yes, we're going to provide food and shelter for you, even though you may say you don't want it.
The two options on the table are not freezing to death and being forced into a long-term facility where you have no protections and no rights and no choices and no life. Those are not the two choices. We know how to support people. We know how to create relationships, provide resources, provide treatment, provide care. We don't do it.
Right. Because it's very expensive. It takes lots of people. It takes tons of community support. It's better if there's a family in place who can usher that person back into a loving home. And yet our societies are fractured in a way we can't offer that to people.
Right.
And we haven't had the will to develop a tax base to actually fund those very intensive programs.
That's right. But I think it's really important to remember that we are capable of creating solutions that work, that are humane, and that are really good for the people, by and large, receiving support, and really good for the people offering support. You know, the illness that is really at work here is a social illness of our society. You know, an unwillingness to take action and think creatively and be more mindful with our resources. And instead of saying, we can't afford this, we can't afford this, we can't afford this. Now, I'm not saying that we can afford this, but I am saying there are creative solutions, and we fall into a very dangerous trap when we start to think, well, you know, Kings Park was better than Sing Sing Prison, and those are our two choices. Or forced treatment is better than letting someone freeze or starve on the street. I don't think you'd find many advocates for forcing people to starve or freeze on the street, but I think we start to ricochet back and forth between those two choices as if those are our only options, and that's nonsense.
Yeah, I love the way you just framed that, Lucy. By the way, that's fantastic. I want to talk more about your Unlocked website and what people can access when they come. First of all, you have Section 1, which is a multidisciplinary video curriculum. So teachers and trainers and discussion leaders can come and see what? What type of videos are there?
Well, what happened was we first made a documentary feature called Kings Park, Stories from an American Mental Institution. And while we were filming this feature, we shot about 100 hours of footage, and we all thought, oh my God, how are we ever going to, whittle this away to 90 minutes of footage? We're going to lose all these incredible stories that have so much value that no one's ever heard before. It's about the past and about the present, as I explained before. And the stories are told, the videos, basically what you have in the curriculum are documentary interviews and scenes.
Cool.
And they're short. And they're filmed by us as filmmakers. So, for instance, we focus on the topic of admissions. In another, we focus on the topic of recovery. And what somebody will find in these modules is a short video. Let's say there are 6 or 7 or 10 of them. An essay which introduces the topic, discussion questions that help the discussion leader or the professor or the trainer to shape a discussion, a transcript to follow what's said in the scene, and issues to be aware of as you watch the video.
Wow, so cool.
So people tell their stories, or you watch actual scenes of engagement, documentary scenes. And we had the idea that we needed to make not just the movie available as an educational tool, but all of the footage that we shot to make this movie. We very recently, with the foundation, succeeded in creating a prototype. And even though it's still to be expanded and developed, it's, let's say, a third of what the completed size of the project will be in its current state. It's developed enough that we can start making it available to schools and to providers.
I want to just briefly talk about, just because this seems like it's such an incredible resource for especially teachers, research students who want to try to learn more about lived experience, and especially in institutions. How do people support this kind of project, Lucy? Tell me the steps for someone to actually get engaged and really be a partner in your project.
Oh, I'd be delighted to do that. We work with the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, and we work with a fiscal agent who receives our donations, who is here in New York City, called Women Make Movies. And they've only to go to the Women Make Movies website, go to our project, Unlocked, and they can make a tax-deductible contribution. They can also do the same with the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, who will refer them to us or to Women Make Movies. And last of all, they can get directly into contact with us at our website, kingsparkmovie.com.
The Unlocked Stories of Public Mental Health Care is available through unlocked-minds.org, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic site. I'm going to go home this afternoon and go all through your offerings because, Lucy, you've done something here that's almost impossible to do. Gained access to places that are almost always too secret, and we know why. And also the way that you've shared people's narratives and allowed them to tell their truth has just been so phenomenal. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And back at you, I think what you're doing is incredible.
Lucy Weiner and the Unlocked Project. Thanks again for being with us, Lucy.
Thank you.
And if you want to become a sustaining member of the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, you can just click on the link right now, look through the projects that you are interested in, and hopefully Lucy's is one of those that could really use your support.
Thank you.